Hi there, and welcome to episode 19 of Side Chat. In this episode, James and I discuss about psychological contract and the concept of the whole person. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any suggestions or comments, please send them to sidechat@omnisci.com or tweet to side_chat. Hi there, and welcome to episode 19 of Side Chat. My name is Dr. Austin Tay, and I'm joined again today by James Mollicott, who is now still based in Malaysia, in Johor, with a sunny weather that he has shared with me earlier on. How are you, James?
Really good, thanks, Austin. Thanks for inviting me again.
Wow, it's always my pleasure, and you're my co-host. That's why I like to have you, and then I always like to challenge you, or rather challenge ourselves with topics that I think is interesting. And I kind of bestow this on you with this particular topic for this podcast. So today we're going to be talking about psychological contract. Has it evolved? That's the topic, or that's the title of this podcast. Now we have been talking about personality, motivation, and then last week we kind of wrap it all up with social identity, and how individuals could choose their own social identity based on how motivated they are, their own personality traits. Now, I like to kind of put this into perspective. How do we apply this whole concept of a whole person to work, right? I managed to get this quote from Henry Ford. He said, "Why is it that I always get the whole person when all I really want is a pair of hands?" Which is quite interesting because I think I know where he's coming from. But for me, I think
that is theory X in a nutshell.
It is, isn't it? But I think it's one of a very strange thing because the organization is always having this expectation. We don't really want the whole person. We want that person to be able to perform the work, and that's it. So if they can, they will want to split us into halves, really. The working self and also the home self, right? But sad to say, whether organization want us as whole person or not, the whole person is going to be reporting for work. We're going to be there as an entire person, whether we want it or not too, because we can't separate our emotions, our thoughts as we go to work, our private thoughts and emotions. Likewise, when we come back, it is very difficult to disassociate ourselves from the concerns that we have kind of accumulated during the work hours. So it's very difficult to kind of say, no, we don't want that person to be there as a whole person. We have to have that. Then, of course, the question here would be, can the whole person with varied social identities, because we choose our membership, be applied in the work context? And does our employment contract actually allow us to do so? Maybe before you answer that, or maybe before we discuss this, a little bit about what employment contract is. When we talk about employment contract, it's something legally bind, kind of delineates what you do for your work, how much you be paid, what kind of benefits you're going to get, etc. in the contract itself. Often this is what we usually get, and not all employment contracts are very explicit. There are certain things organization will want you to do, but they don't tell you. So before we go on to the next part, I just want to go back to the question I was asking. Can whole person with varied social identities be applied in a work context? And does our employment contract allow us to do so? What do you think, James?
I think there's quite a mixed bag in that, and I'm not sure it even ultimately fits as a question.
Yeah.
The multiple social identities is, if we take multiple identity stuff, social identity theories, in terms of me as a male, me as a friend, me as a British person, me as a psychologist. These are social identities that I have acquired or been given to me. Me as an employee, me as a colleague, lots of things, and as well as those identities that I have been derived from my motivations and traits over the years. In terms of I'm a conscientious person, I am brave, I am caring, whatever those sorts of ideas that sort of coalesce my motivations and traits into some sort of identity of who I am. Can those fit into the workplace? It's inevitably they do, because, as you said, you can't separate the hands from the person. That is inevitable to it, and it simply is. I think it lays down, is what you're sort of getting to, is that the task for management, like it or not, for leaders, is to lead and engage with the whole person in all their horrendous complexity and contradictions, strengths and weaknesses, the whole lot. And that, when we embrace the idea of how this person sees themselves in the world, what their traits are, what their motives are, what their values are, how they're living their work inside and outside of the time that they give you. And I think that's just what one has to do. One has to engage with that if you're going to get the best out of that person, for the pure motive of the organization to get more work done at a higher level for longer, or for as long as you need them to do it, for the lowest price. I mean, that's what managers have to do to engage, unfortunately, and away from that sort of Tayloristic view of scientific management, of just treating humans as mechanical resources. They are humans.
Yeah.
And the challenge is to deal with everything about them in order to get your performance, get your engagement, and avoid the risk of problematic behaviors. And that's the same thing. And that's where I think, when we were talking about before, several months ago, about counterproductive work behaviors, is that the preoccupation of HR and HR models has been for a long, long time on performance. What are the factors that I need to deal with to get the best performance out of this person? So when we look at competency models, knowledge, skills, experiences, perform. But we know full well that engagement is a driver of that. It's how you actually engage, turn that motor on. So without engagement, you don't get performance, even if the fundamentals are there. And beyond that, we have dark traits, the fact that the whole person comes to work and they have parts of their personality that, if you activate them, if you don't control them, will end up with potentially problematic behaviors. The whole person. Yeah. Manage it, like it or not.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you when you say the word engagement. It's quite a strange word, because when we talk to organization, one of the kind of party line that they will use is, we want to engage our employees to make sure what we could help them to develop and make sure they will be kind of contribute to the organization. But it is very selective when we talk about engagement. They were based on certain criteria or certain tools that they use, and then identify certain issues, and this is what it is. Then we are going to engage the person based on that. But when we are talking about a whole person, it's not just piecemeal bits or certain bits that you identify with an individual. It has to be a whole person. While using those tools, you might, as an organization, identify certain components that you need to further engage your employees. When you're looking at data of the sort, you have to look beyond that data. You should look at the individual itself also as, how about other aspect that this person might not be responding to us or disengaged? What can we do? And I think this is very important, talking about whole person itself. We can't separate us from a particular area only and how that fits into work. If this is done so, then the whole exercise of engagement is wrong, because you're not engaging the person from the start as a whole person. You're engaging them only some components of it. So I think that is wrong when you hear, and you and I hear an organization talking about engagement. I sometimes laugh when they say, oh, we're doing an engagement survey. I say, okay, well, what are the data that you've actually come up with, and what do you get out from it, and what are you going to be doing? Oh, we realize we need to do more training on communication. We need to be training them to make sure they are a bit more savvy, or they're a bit more open, more critical and everything. I said, well, that is good to know, but how about other aspect of that individual? Have you actually sat down and talked to them about other aspect apart from the score that you got from the engagement survey? No. I said then you're not actually addressing the individual as a whole person. You're just addressing the person because you feel that all those areas that you have identified in our engagement survey are only relevant to you as an organization, but you do not treat your employees as a partner in this contract that you sign with them as an employment contract, right? So I think this is where to me as a psychologist, and we talk about things like that very openly, I always get very frustrated when people tell me, can you do an engagement survey for me? I say, no, I'm not going to do an engagement survey until I know why you're doing it, what is the purpose, and how are you going to use those data. And 9 out of 10, I always get those information, which I felt, why are you spending this money on engagement survey, which you could actually use a much more cheaper way in dealing with issues? That is, to have a frank conversation with your employees and understand them. Yeah. Firstly, as an individual. Secondly, then as an employee. Because if you do it the other way around, you're never going to actually understand the person as an entire person. And it pains me to say this, but I really wish, if there are listeners who are working for organization, please think about why you're doing engagement survey. And if you're doing it wrongly, you need to be looking at the other part of, how do I further get more information about this individual? Maybe having an open conversation and asking things like, how are you feeling today? What is actually troubling you? What are the things that you have concern apart from the work itself? Are there any other things that's actually preventing you from being an effective employee? And I think this is very important. And contractually, anyway, you're supposed to be taking care of your employee. And I think that's why the question was saying, does the employer contract allow us to identify someone as a whole person? I find that I don't think that is entirely possible or true, in a sense, because people who are managing it are not very good at understanding why they have an employment contract with someone. They just do it because, I guess, everybody else is having an employment contract. It's very standard. We don't think beyond that. And that kind of brings me to think about, maybe there is another form of contract that we should be talking about. And you and I know what we are trying to talk about here. It's more like a psychological contract, right? And what is psychological contract itself? And maybe we just a quick definition of what psychological contract is. Psychological contract is a belief that an exchange partner is obligated to provide inducements such as fair compensation in exchange for one's own contribution, such as loyalty or high quality work. Now, this is very different from a contract. This is more of a very implicit kind of thinking or expectation from either the employee side or the organization perspective here. Now, maybe, in terms of dealing with social identity or as a whole person, psychological contract could help us to explain that. I don't know. This was just in my head when I was coming to you with this podcast, and you kind of obliged and say, well, let's talk about it, and this is why we're What do you think? Do you think psychological contract will be able to help us to explain the concept of a whole person, someone who has different social identity at work?
The good thing about the psychological contract idea, and firstly, it is a concept, a philosophy, really. It's not something that is entirely defined. It's not something in some ways is completely measurable. But it is a powerful idea that it's these unwritten expectations of inputs and outputs. What I'll do for you, what you'll do for me. The good thing about it, so of course it's then linked to equity theory and core things about fairness and trust and openness, communication. So that links back to your idea of psychological safety. It really links the psychological contract that how I think you're going to treat me, given all the multiple things that might happen in a day at work or a year of work, internal and external variables, but how I think the organization, and this is the interesting thing as well, that the organization will treat me given what I might do, how I might respond, or whether that's my additional work, working hard, failing, succeeding, super succeeding, solving problems beyond expectations or otherwise, that I will get something back from that. I think what's interesting with the psychological contract is there's so much of culture and values, social norms, the things we talked about that actually help shape identities and needs, define what I want and how I want it, values are shaped by society and the organization's values. How IBM would treat its employees in the 70s and 80s would be known by everybody. That's their brand. That's the IBM way. The same with how you can be expected to be treated in GE. If you underperform, out you go. If you put in extra effort, who cares? Obviously, I'm not that familiar with GE. I've used it as a perhaps an unfortunate example, an incorrect example. My apologies to any GE people. But the idea that companies' values, social norms, we were talking earlier about political systems, or in terms of liberal democracies or other approaches to citizenship, that those have values of how I should behave. I think so. There are many important things about the concept of psychological contract, but perhaps a really important thing is that it's the idea of perception of the employee to what the employer does.
Right.
It's fundamentally seen from the employee's perspective. And that breaching the contract, although employees, you may get an abusive employee who actually they do breach the contract, that psychological contract. They run the edge of their behavior. Classic passive-aggressive behavior is a great example of this one. They really try to fine line into the what's written in the contract of employment and the spirit, the expectation of employment, what it means. Does it mean that you leave at 6 o'clock every day on the dot of 6 o'clock? No, that's never expected in a team, in a variable, challenging organization when, there's an urgent need. It's like you're a nurse and your shift in ER finishes at 6 o'clock, and a casualty comes in at 5 to 6, or your colleague who's going to come in to take over your place is late, that you would leave. In your contract, it says you can leave.
Yes.
Job's done. You won't be paid any extra. Nothing's there.
Yep.
Psychologically, the team, your employer, your supervisor, primarily is the employer there, and that's where that contract is primarily driven by that. Although there's also psychological contracts with the team members. I have a contract with you as a team member, a horizontal contract, not just a vertical one. And if I leave, your trust in me as a reliable, good person, let alone a teammate or an employee, is completely broken. You're just seen as a selfish person. Who walks around with my legal contract saying that's all you can expect from me. That's all you're going to get.
Yep.
And that's all I expect in return. Wow. That real transactional approach to life fundamentally doesn't suit humans because we're the whole thing.
Yep.
We are social beings.
Yep.
So the psychological contract not just refers really strongly to the perception of the employee to social norms, company, corporate values, how they should be treated, and what they're expected of beyond the writing, how many hours, how much for. That doesn't say how I'm supposed to be polite or put in extra effort to help, general helpfulness, or just being trustworthy to the organization or to my colleagues. It doesn't say any of those things, but the perception of it is really important. And if you're trying to understand how you're going to get engagement, you must think from the employee's point of view. For them, what is fair, what is reasonable. And if you don't reach down to that, which is finally back to your point, then you're missing the humanity. And that every employee will have a slightly different idea about what's fair and reasonable for me to give. But those expectations are set through cultural norms and expectations, family values that translate to what I think a good employee should be, a good team member should be, a good partner should be, a good boss should be.
I totally agree with what you said. I was intending to talk a little bit more about the new kind of working environment and how psychological contract will apply to perhaps freelancers or slashers, they call themselves, or the gig economy. But because we are now on a kind of a roll here, I want to perhaps go back a little bit more what you were saying, that this whole psychological contract is very implicit on, usually is the expectation of the employers wanting the employees to do certain things, although it's not written on the contract itself. But as you also said, it is very important for the employees to have a voice, because if they don't feel they are fairly treated, or they do not feel that they are taken care of by the organization, even though it's not explicitly said on the contract itself. Now, this is where I think the policies of organizations should be clear, how they should protect them, and how those policies could be, in a way, covering the expectation, the implicit expectation within the psychological contract, and treating human beings or employees as a whole person is very important. They are not going to be there slaving for you, or working very hard. I shouldn't say slaving, but working very hard for you, if you don't learn to appreciate and treat them as part of the organization. And we know, dealing with a lot of organizations, sometimes employers are very transactional. You are signing this contract with me, therefore you have to do this amount of work, but I'm expecting you to do a little bit more, because in your contract, there's this particular clause that all of us will look at it and not sure how to explain it. And any other duties employers see fit to allocate to you. And this is one of those very open-ended clause in a contract that employers leave it very open because it benefits them. But learn to appreciate that the employee's consent is also very important, right? While we understand this is a very transactional contract, if the motivation is not there, right, and if the opportunity comes, they are ready to go out of the office, out of your organization at any time. So for organization to think that, I have this contract, it's signed and sealed, it's fine, you shouldn't be worried about it for this concept of psychological contract, I would say organization rethink. And James, you say it very well. This is a concept which not many people actually talk about it or want to talk about it, because it is too difficult to identify, it's too difficult to define, and where do you draw the line? But in terms of being human about it, talking about humanity, organization is made up of a lot of people, individuals, who essentially have feelings and thoughts and what have you. It doesn't it doesn't take a lot to be a little bit more compassionate towards your employees. I only can see win-win on both sides if you treat employees as you should as a human being, and go beyond that legal contract and look at what you could actually offer them in terms of a psychological contract. That would be very helpful. But of course, how can one decide what is a psychological contract between you and your you as an organization and your employees? I think this is where we were talking about having that very frank, open conversation with your employees, to lay down the expectation, maybe the implicit expectation, is very important, and not to just expect, but not taking into consideration how your employees are feeling too. And I think that is important. Now, as I said earlier on, I really want to talk about the new working environment, but I want to put into another episode if I could, because I think that bit will be quite interesting to look at the work environment, the change of the work environment, and those who are not fully employed as an employee. How do they treat psychological contract there? But coming back to this point, I think there's a lot for organization to think about when we talk about psychological contract. It is I must stress, it is not a new concept. It is a concept, has been talked about many years, and people have done research in that. It's just that something I felt at this time, especially when a lot of employees are working from home, where work and also home life is blurred at the moment. Psychological contract seems to be a recurring theme as I talk to people. So yes, it's something worth thinking about it. James, do you have any other thing that you
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do something else on this one next time.
Yes.
I think the core of it, trying to get to practical applications of what is a basic idea that the working relationship, in order to get from a human the productivity, commitment, and an absence of problematic behaviors that the company needs, there is a document that says, here's legally what we agree that you will do for us, and the standards that you will seek to attain, and the reasons how we can part company. But it is a relationship that exists, and the relationship is fundamentally executed by the people surrounding the employee on a daily basis. That's the particular supervisor or boss and the other employees around them that they engage with. So that already says that the expectations of the relationship part of it, the employee have an expectation about of how I will be treated and what is expected from me as a citizen of this organization. So again, we get into organizational citizenship behaviors, that sort of area too. But I think this is the expectations of what the organization expects from me and what I expect from the organization. These are not necessarily written, but they are socially given. They are transmitted to me from the employer brand, from the recruitment process. Should be very clear to me what's expected in the relationship part of it. And I think a critical thing where the psychological contract comes out is in two parts. The organization's values that are aligns and fully translated into its HR processes. That's from selection, performance, training and development, career management, and even outplacement. So if the values are clear and real, and if they've been translated and echoed into the employment practices, live processes, then the expectations are real. So I expect to, in performance management, just be given a number once in the year, and based upon that, I'll be promoted, given more money, or fired. If that's really clear, and if that's based upon the value that's related to that thing, then that's coherent. I understand that. I might not like it, but it's clear, it's expressed, and that's part of the deal. And the behaviors around that will cascade into other parts of how I'm treated. How the leadership style of the organization, I would expect, will be coherent with that. The key thing is, I think, is that the expectations need to be clear. And it's the organizational values and translation of that make it clear and coherent. It right down to the leadership of every individual manager there. And that's where it gets complicated, of course.
Yeah.
I think so. It's really about expectations on both sides, and that the expectations of the individual do change. And what your point about the gig economy and new working relationships is really, really powerful, I think, because the expectations of employment have changed radically in the last year, or have been accelerated last year. The gig economy, I mean, if I go onto Fiverr or a freelancer and I'm going to get somebody to design a flyer, a marketing flyer, I give out the task, I can get bids, I can hire the designer sends me certain things, and in different designers that I've worked with, the relationship's very different. I'm there trying to motivate and encourage as if I'm leading them as an employee, but they're not. They've got multiple projects going on. They might not even say regards. They might not bother with any pleasantries. Just get the job done, get paid, and move on. And it's really interesting because in my expectations are that we will actually have a pleasant relationship here. I'll respect you, you'll respect me, and we might have something afterwards. But the freelancer who's working from out of Jakarta, who's looking for 50 clients and is bidding for 50 projects every day, doesn't care. It's a volume game. I can't hurt them because they're hurt every day by people denying their work and rejecting their proposals. So it's really interesting. I think it comes to your points to what's the nature of the expectations on either side. Because if there's no breach of psychological contract, then there's no problem. If it's breached, then the whole basis of engagement falls away. And you get whatever the withdrawal behaviors you're going to get to rebalance that out. So I think exploring the gig economy and the expectations now of work is fundamental to understanding the relationship between an employer and freelancers and short-term employment. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that is, I will promise all of you, this is something that we want to discuss a bit more in detail in the next podcast or maybe the subsequent one. But I think talking a little bit about psychological contract today, we all know it's very implicit, but clarity needs to be there. If we know what are the expectations, then there'll be no breach. And once there's no breach, then we all be somewhat very much happier in terms of psychological contract. And I think this is important just to give a taster to our listeners what exactly it is. I'll put some show notes on this episode a little bit more about what psychological contract is, and we'll share it with all the listeners. Right. Kind of a serious topic. Well, most of our sessions are always serious topic anyway. But today, as usual, thank you very much, James, for talking to me and having this discussion with me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed talking about this. And we will be actually coming towards the end of the year, aren't we? So we will probably be talking a little bit more about what we're going to do in the last wrap up. But definitely stay tuned if you are listening to us for the first time. Hope you are actually subscribing to us on this podcast. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to sitechat@omnisci.com or tweet to site_chat. All right. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks again, James, for today.
Thanks, Austin.
You have been listening to Site Chat. This podcast is brought to you by OmniSci Consulting. We are a team of psychologists with a wealth of experience in working with individuals, teams, and organizations in the areas of coaching, executive selection, assessment and development, career transitioning, and workplace intervention. OmniSci Consulting exists to solve the critical issues facing our clients, both large and small. Our approach is to tailor-make each service to meet the requirements of our clients. Our broad range of services and solutions help individuals and organizations to facilitate change, achieve their vision and optimize performance and productivity. For more information about our services, do check us out at www.omnisci.com.